called out a small but strong guard of well-selected men to escort them. Thus provided and attended, they rode over to the enemy's lines, and advanced so near that, from a small eminence to which they ascended, they could survey the whole scene of William's encampment, the palisades and embankments with which it was guarded, which extended for miles, the long lines of tents within, the vast multitude of soldiers, the knights and officers riding to and fro, glittering with steel, and the grand pavilion of the Duke himself, with the consecrated banner of the cross floating above it. Harold was very much impressed with the grandeur of the spectacle. After gazing on this scene for some time in silence, Harold said to Gurth that perhaps, after all, the policy of falling back would have been the wisest for them to adopt, rather than to risk a battle with so overwhelming a force as they saw before them. He did not know, he added, but that it would be best for them to change their plan and adopt that policy now. Gurth said that it was too late. They had taken their stand, and now for them to break up their encampment and retire would be considered a retreat, and not a manoeuvre, and it would discourage and dishearten the whole realm. After surveying thus, as long as they desired to do so, the situation and extent of William's encampment, Harold's party returned to their own lines, still determined to make a stand there against the invaders, but feeling great doubt and despondency in respect to the result. Harold sent over, too, in the course of the day, some spies. The men whom he employed for this purpose were Normans by birth, and they could speak the French language. There were many Normans in England who had come over in King Edward's time. These Norman spies could, of course, disguise themselves and mingle without attracting attention among the thousands of workmen and camp followers that were going and coming continually around the grounds which William's army occupied. They did this so effectually that they penetrated within the encampment without difficulty, examined everything, and in due time returned to Harold with their report. They gave a formidable account of the numbers and condition of William's troops. There was a large corps of bowmen in the army, who had adopted a fashion of being shaven and shorn in such a manner that the spies mistook them for priests. They told Harold accordingly on their return that there were more priests in William's camp than there were soldiers in all his army. During this eventful day, William too sent a body of horsemen across the country, which separated the two encampments, though his emissaries were not spies but ambassadors, with propositions for peace. William had no wish to fight a battle, if what he considered as rightfully his kingdom could be delivered to him without it, and he determined to make one final effort to obtain a peaceable surrender of it before coming to the dreadful resort of an appeal to arms. He accordingly sent his embassy with 3 propositions to make to the English king. The principal messenger in this company was a monk, whose name was Marigot. He rode, with a proper escort and a flag of truce, to Harold's lines. The propositions were these, by accepting either of which the monk said that Harold might avoid a battle. 1. That Harold should surrender the kingdom to William, as he had solemnly sworn to do over the sacred relics in Normandy. 2. That they should both agree to refer the whole subject of controversy between them to the Pope, and abide by his decision. 3. That they should settle the dispute by single combat, the 2 claimants to the crown to fight a duel on the plain, in presence of their respective armies. It is obvious that Harold could not accept either of these propositions. The first was to give up the whole point at issue. As for the second, the Pope had already prejudged the case, and if it were to be referred to him there could be no doubt that he would simply reaffirm his former decision. And in respect to single combat, the disadvantage on Harold's part would be as great in such a contest as it would be in the proposed arbitration. He was himself a man of comparatively slender form and of little bodily strength. William, on the other hand, was distinguished for his size and for his extraordinary muscular energy. In a modern combat with firearms, these personal advantages would be of no avail, but in those days, when the weapons were battle axes, lances, and swords, they were almost decisive of the result. Harold therefore declined all William's propositions, and the monk returned. William seems not to have been wholly discouraged by this failure of his first attempt at negotiation, for he sent his embassage a second time to make one more proposal. It was, that if Harold would consent to acknowledge William as King of England, William would assign the whole territory to him and to his brother Gurth, to hold as provinces under William's general sway. Under this arrangement William would himself return to Normandy, making the city of Rouen, which was his capital there, the capital of the whole united realm. To this proposal Harold replied that he could not, on any terms, give up his rights as sovereign of England. He therefore declined this proposal also. He, however, now made a proposition in his turn. He was willing, he said, to compromise the dispute, so far as it could be done, by the payment of money. If William would abandon his invasion and return to Normandy, giving up his claims to the English crown, he would pay him, he said, any sum of money that he would name. William could not accept this proposal. He was, as he believed, the true and rightful heir to the throne of England, and there was a point of honour involved, as well as a dictate of ambition to be obeyed, in insisting on the claim. In the meantime, the day had passed, while these fruitless negotiations had been pending. Night was coming on. William's officers and councillors began to be uneasy at the delay. They said that every hour new reinforcements were coming into Harold's camp, while they themselves were gaining no advantage, and consequently, the longer the battle was delayed, the less was the certainty of victory. Sir William promised them that he would attack King Harold in his camp the very next morning. As the time for the great final struggle drew near, Harold's mind was oppressed more and more with a sense of anxiety and with foreboding fears. His brothers, too, were ill at ease. Their solicitude was increased by the recollection of Harold's oath, and of the awful sanctions with which they feared the sacred relics might have invested it. They were not sure that their brother's excuse for setting it aside would save him from the guilt and curse of perjury in the sight of Heaven. So they proposed, on the eve of the battle, that Harold himself should retire, and leave them to conduct the defence. "We cannot deny," they said, "that you did take the oath, and, notwithstanding the circumstances which seem to absolve you from the obligation, it is best to avoid, if possible, the open violation of it. It will be better, on the whole, for you to leave the army and go to London. You can aid very effectually in the defence of the kingdom by raising reinforcements there. We will stay and encounter the actual battle. Heaven cannot be displeased with us for so doing, for we shall only be discharging the duty incumbent on all, of defending their native land from foreign invasion." Harold would not consent to adopt this plan. He could not retire himself, he said, at the hour of approaching danger, and leave his brothers and his friends exposed when it was his crown for which they were contending. Such were the circumstances of the two armies on the evening before the battle, and, of course, in such a state of things, the tendency of the minds of men would be, in Harold's camp, to gloom and despondency, and in William's to confidence and exultation. Harold undertook, as men in his circumstances often do, to lighten the load which weighed upon his own heart and oppressed the spirits of his men, by feasting and wine. He ordered a plentiful supper to be served, and supplied his soldiers with abundance of drink, and it is said that his whole camp exhibited, during the whole night, one widespread scene of carousing and revelry, the troops being gathered everywhere in groups around their camp fires, some half stupefied, others quarrelling, and others still singing national songs, and dancing with wild excitement, according to the various effects produced upon different constitutions by the intoxicating influence of beer and wine. In William's camp there were witnessed very different scenes. There were a great many monks and ecclesiastics in the train of his army, and, on the night before the battle, they spent the time in saying masses, reading litanies and prayers, chanting anthems, and in other similar acts of worship